Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. We are joined today by a familiar voice, Dan Well, Marketing and Insights Director at MRI Springboard. Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm good, Simon. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. So we're going to be recording a few of these over the next 12 months, aren't we? Kind of every 4 to 6 weeks to keep people up to speed with footfall trends and the insights that you're seeing. But since we last spoke, and there might have been a clue in your job title, we've now got MRI in there. So do you want to tell us about that big change to the organisation?
Certainly, and we have. At the end of September last year, actually, Springboard was acquired by MRI Software, which, if anyone doesn't know who they are, and I must confess, I didn't until we started the acquisition process. MRI is the leading company in the property tech software world, so providing technology and software to occupiers and to owners to help them manage their physical estate. So there's lots of synergies between what MRI does and what Springboard does. And one thing that they were lacking, which is the reason why they acquired Springboard, was any customer analytics and data. So hopefully we're going to be able to supplement their proposition and also add real value to our client base as well. So really exploit those synergies between the two organisations.
Exciting time. Sounds like a win-win for everybody then.
Yeah, no, it is really exciting. And there's lots of other insights that MRI have under their hood that we're going to be able to exploit and help people understand what's happening, things around energy and also understanding what's happening in terms of occupiers across property assets in different sectors across the UK and also internationally because MRI actually is a US-based business. They've got over 3,000 employees that I didn't know, 1,000 in the US, 1,000 in EMEA and 1,000 in APAC. So it's a much, much bigger business than Springboard.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll keep close to that as we record future episodes in terms of you can give us an update on how it's progressing and any other bits of insight that might be useful for listeners to understand.
Certainly, we'll do.
So I know you're speaking again at our productivity forum in September. Always get great feedback on your sessions and everybody that attends finds it really insightful. So I think the themes of these podcasts are going to be just about that regular update, the trends, the insights you're seeing, where we're moving in terms of our shopping patterns and behaviours. So do you want to kind of kick off with the latest view of the world that you and the MRI Springboard team are seeing?
Yeah, sure. So there's obviously some underlying long-term trends that I talked about in the last conference that I was at with you guys. And one of the key trends out of those is hybrid working. And this is really influencing how shoppers behave. We've just completed our February results and released our February reports. So please feel free to go onto our website at spring-board.info and dip into those. But what we saw actually was really quite interesting, given the cost of living crisis particularly, was that footfall in February actually rose from January by 9.4%. And versus a drop in January, but then footfall always drops in January from December, because clearly once Christmas trading has finished, we've got no money and no one particularly go shopping. So that's a long-term trend. But we're seeing this, we saw an uplift, which was positive. But actually it was the biggest uplift in February since 2010. So that, despite this cost of living crisis, and this is a trend that reflects some of the feedback I've had from both shopping mall owners and also retailers, that they're really not seeing yet this huge impact of the cost of living crisis in terms of shopper numbers. Yes, people may be trading down in terms of value, but certainly they're still going shopping. But we still have this gap in footfall from 2019, and we would have had a gap anyway, as I have said numerous times, because of this migration over to online with more browsing being done online, which reduces footfall anyway. But the gap is sitting still at around 12% and more than that in shopping centres and high streets, 15% in high streets and 16% in shopping centres. So we're not back to anywhere near where we were in 2019, but I wouldn't expect us to be. And also the hybrid working element is suppressing footfall, particularly in high streets. We're simply not in our towns and cities as much as we were pre-COVID. And that, of course, impacts footfall.
And is that shift likely to continue, you think? I mean, I read the news. I'm sure you get the same updates as me from all the various outlets. There's certainly was a drive to get people back in the office. That seems to have tapered off now, and we're settling more into this hybrid world. But then there's also this push, certainly from the big retailers, of this 4-day working week. So does that free people up to go out more to shop, or does it just mean we stay at home more, do you think?
I mean, it's really interesting with the 4-day working week, isn't it? Because I think there's a cultural shift that's required for us to get our heads around that in large part. And I think people tend to work at home on a Friday. Well, at Springboard, or at MRI Springboard now, we actually carry out a survey of consumers every quarter to try and understand what they're doing and how this influences footfall, particularly in relation to hybrid working. So one of the questions we ask is around how many days a week do people work at home? And we've consistently seen that over 50% of respondents work at home for at least part of the week. And actually, this is starting to increase. And in February, it was 56% from 53% in November. So, certainly hybrid working is becoming solidified. It's becoming mature. It's something that we're all doing. Employers, of course, who have to pay the rent and rates on office space are keen to get us back into our offices for at least part of the time. But I think they're having to recognise that actually most people don't want to be in 5 days a week anymore. They like hybrid working, and particularly on a Friday, of course. And I think while some employers are looking at 4-day working weeks and some are testing it, I think in large part we will be still at a 5-day working week, but albeit that people will largely be working at home on a Friday. So I don't think things will shift too much from that, but we are already seeing shifts in consumer behaviour around how we shop as a consequence of hybrid working, which are really interesting.
And it's interesting because there's some organisations, clearly if you're in any customer-facing environment, 4-day working from 5 days is a really tricky transition because you need to balance rotas and deployment. And yeah, we'd all love to be at home Monday, Friday, and have a long weekend. So I think we've got to remember that the vast majority of the population in the service industry, and if you work in the public sector, hospitals, etc., they're 24/7 environment. So it's a smaller proportion of the pie that potentially get this option.
Absolutely. And what we've seen again from this consumer survey that we carry out is that of those people who do work in a hybrid fashion, the overriding change in their behaviour has been a less frequent visit to retail destinations. But, underlying that are also changes around how long they spend in retail destinations. So they're going less frequently, but they're spending longer when they're there. They're mixing their shopping with leisure and eating out more than they did. And this was a trend that we were seeing pre-COVID anyway, but it's been accelerated through COVID because actually, thinking logically about it, and we all think about our own behaviour, we're simply not in towns and cities as much. So when we do go, we tend to make more of a visit of it and make that much more of a leisure trip. So it's much more about experience rather than functional shopping. And interestingly, at the same time, because people are working from home during the week and they can't necessarily go shopping during the week as they perhaps did when they were in towns and cities in their offices, we've seen a slightly greater increase in the influence of Saturday as a shopping day. Now, it's quite a small marginal increase at the moment, but this is only the start of the trend, really. So actually what this may force retailers to do longer term is to put more energy and resource into the weekend shopper. So actually staff up at the weekend, make sure that more people are working at the weekend, which sort of goes against the 4-day week unless they're taking their 4 days, which includes a Saturday.
Yeah.
But, you would have thought that it would be the evening, but it's actually a Saturday that's becoming even more important.
And it's always been, I suppose, a bit of a holy grail in retail of get your evenings and weekends right, because that's where people at work, 9 to 5 or in those type of environments will come to your shops. I think there was a real push on it. Maybe that's been relaxed slightly post lockdown, but having that experienced colleague at the weekend is crucial because what you tend to find is it's your more part-timers, your students, maybe people that can't work in the week because of childcare commitments, etc., that get out. So there's that balance of keeping your more experienced colleagues happier, but also making sure you don't lose that experience at the weekends when you've got a peak in footfall. And therefore, if people are spending longer when they are out shopping, more of an opportunity to sell to them.
Absolutely. And all the feedback we've had from our shopping centre clients is that actually on a Sunday particularly, it's a sort of different dynamic in terms of shopping. So Sunday, it tends to be a family group. They tend to spend longer there. They make bigger purchases because they've got the whole family group there. So you need, as you say, you need those experienced salespeople and colleagues able to maximise the value of those trips. So what you don't want is all those experienced colleagues on a Monday and Tuesday and a Wednesday when people are working at home and have, fairly new novice colleagues in on a weekend who perhaps can't maximise that sale. So it is going to be a challenge, as all things in retail, everything is always moving. It doesn't feel like it moves very quickly sometimes, but it is constantly shifting because our behaviour is shifting. And I think, certainly since COVID, we've seen the greatest shift in behaviours for decades as a consequence of COVID. It has created that seismic shift where, and that's driven out of the changes in the way we work.
Absolutely. So good news, Footfall is on the rise from coming out of January into February. What other key trends are you seeing at the moment?
Well, some of the other underlying trends were the sort of resilience of retail parks that we saw all the way through COVID. That's still the case. Retail parks are still the location of choice for many shoppers. The gap in footfall in retail parks from 2019 is very minimal. So they really have managed to hold on to shoppers. And of course, we know that the majority of shoppers buy the vast or most of their food in store rather than online. So that's continuing. And because of the limited supply in retail parks, of course, they're ever more valuable as an asset for the owners. So they're constantly seeking to reinvent them and improve them. And that's all to the benefit of shoppers. And of course, pro rata rental levels are lower in retail parks for retailers, and you can get much more in those stores. So there's lots of tenant re-engineering going on in retail parks, and I think everyone will have seen those in their own retail parks, their own local retail parks. Some of the M&Ss who used to have 3 or 4 stores in a town are rationalising that presence and coming out of some retail parks, and that's opening up opportunities for new tenants, and of course that opens up new opportunities for shoppers as well. So lots of things around retail parks. Online is particularly interesting because everyone anticipated that once we had bought into the idea of being online shoppers, we would carry on being online shoppers after COVID. But actually, that's proven not to be the case. And we've all gone back to our pre-COVID behaviour in terms of the proportions of us who spend in store versus online, which is really interesting. And that's a really good indicator for the future of bricks and mortar retail. We are the same proportion virtually now spending online as they were pre-COVID. And actually, if online spending had followed the same trend line that it had done pre-COVID, so which is about 3% increase each year, we probably would have had a higher proportion of online spending than we do currently. So it's actually dropped back a little bit in terms of trend line. So that's a really strong, positive future influence for bricks and mortar retail.
I think from a cost point of view, if I was a retailer, I'd be thinking about my online operation now because national living wage is forcing cost up. Clearly, there's supply issues. You've got the big 4 grocers who are kind of competing with each other to keep raising that bar on their minimum payment to attract the best colleagues. But that cost of that online pick and then the reverse logistics is just rising all the time. We were in a conversation the other day where they were picking, the stock comes in, gets put on the shelf, so I've touched it once. It then gets picked by the colleagues to go out for delivery, touched twice. If there's not 100% pick, so there's something out of stock, they don't do substitutes or part picks, so it all goes back, so touched 3 times. If it is successful and goes out, there's more than 50% because this was fashion that comes back, so it's picked 3, it's touched 3 or even 4 times then at a rate of 10.50 plus an hour. That whole metric of the online channel and the stores, the colleagues doing the work is rising exponentially in terms of cost. So I think that's good news for bricks and mortar, good news for certainly retailers doing that. But also, I think they're all starting to rethink that model of, is that a channel we really want to drive, because the cost all sits with us?
Absolutely. And I mean, that sort of mirrors the conversations we're having with our retailer clients, who are saying actually pro rata, it's way more expensive to service online trade than store trade, even with the cost of occupation. I think the retailers are learning in the hard way that, particularly in the fashion and the fast fashion sector, that they are saddled with a huge overhead in terms of online. And and you can see the signs of this happening, with Amazon going into stores, albeit they're not a bricks and mortar retailer, so even they've had to learn the hard way that it's actually probably not quite as easy as they envisioned it would be, and it takes a real skill to sell in store. But certainly, and they recognise that people want to go to destinations. The more we work at home on our own, the more we seek sensory pleasure and the company of people, and that doesn't mean that we want to run back to our offices 5 days a week. It means we want to go out and socialise when we can. So that means that actually footfall is being, it's becoming more resilient, which is really good news. So the cost of online operations is skyrocketing, and of course, if the government come forward with some form of rate review for online, or a sales tax for online, that's going to push costs up even more.
Yeah, and we'll just then push more people back into it. And again, we're seeing lots of, in terms of the social channels, more offers that are store only based rather than online only based. So just that whole drive to get people in on the understanding that they're probably going to spend more, and I'm not going to get as much back. And it's that experience sensory thing you talked about before in terms of just reconnected people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even sort of 10 years ago, John Lewis was saying that, customers who ordered online and came and click and collected actually spent a lot more than if they had it sent to them. Because, once you're in a store, there's all those products to buy. And, hopefully if you've got great staff to engage with your customers and actually upsell as well and increase that ATV and the conversion rate, then there's almost a double bubble there. So, your costs, you've got a fixed environment. You can plan for seasonality because it's a tried and tested formula. A lot of what we buy is about what it looks like to us and what it feels like. And you can't replicate that online.
No, absolutely. So retail park's a good place to be. Certainly, absolutely. Our local ones, lots of redevelopment, corners of car parks being carved off for Tim Hortons drive-throughs or Greg's drive-throughs, etc. So that whole restaurant leisure piece coming through lots more and more. Are there any other key bits that you want to cover on this one?
Yeah, I mean, regional cities, which were lagging behind our small high streets out of COVID, because, of course, as we were in lockdown and working at home, we suddenly rediscovered our local high streets as consumers. And, of course, that helps smaller businesses. Regional cities are starting to pick up now. And actually, regional cities, big cities outside of London, have caught up with market towns in terms of the recovery back to 2019 footfall levels. So people are definitely going back to the office, but as I said, that's still very much in a hybrid fashion. So, but it's, smaller high streets haven't seen the dip in footfall that perhaps we were anticipating would happen if people went back to the office, which is, again, really encouraging. So there tends to be a bit of a win-win for people with hybrid working. And I think the thing about, where we are now in terms of the evidence we have is that we've never had this evidence base about the importance of the working population to bricks and mortar destinations. And this is the first time we've had that. And suddenly we realise that actually without employees and the working population in towns and cities, they're much poorer places. So certainly for those who manage destinations, they need to be thinking about how they can make them attractive and encourage people back into towns and cities in a way that suits their current working environment and how they live their lives.
Yeah, I think a lot of the kind of your Costas, your Starbucks, I think Brewdog do the same, are encouraging people to go and work there as well. So they're a lot more amenable to you going there, buying a couple of coffees throughout the day. I think Brewdog, you can get a table and you get free teas and coffees, and then at the end of the day you get a pint of beer or non-alcoholic beer. So again, thinking creatively about pulling people out of home, not necessarily back into an office, but in a different environment, is great, gives them some revenue, but also gives us a different perspective. And, you might bump into somebody so from a social point of view, all the better.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was in a coffee shop in London yesterday, and people were sitting there for a long time just working, and they were very happy for that, and they were actually serving at the table. They were bringing coffees to people, which of course is important, because in a coffee shop you don't want to be leaving your bags and having to go and order another coffee. But those workspaces outside of your home, so you can just get out of your house for a while, are really important. And of course that will bring people back into high streets. And this particularly works outside of London, of course, because in many cities outside of London, it's easier actually to get into the city centre than it is in central London. You have to be fairly affluent to be able to live in locations close to the centre of London, whereas in Leeds and Liverpool, Manchester, you can actually access those areas much more quickly. There's lots of changes taking place, and of course those at workspaces that will sort of evolve organically are really important, and will bring a whole new profile of shopper into town centres.
Excellent. And we'll finish on London. Is there any particular insight in London? Has it stayed relatively stable? Is it trending the same as other parts of the UK or differently?
London's always lagged other places in terms of recovery, simply because I know we now have a London office, and we didn't before. Travelling into my London office takes me an hour and a half.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so you tend to do that, and you plan those journeys more carefully. So it has tended to lag, but it's starting to come back. Outer London has still shown greater resilience, because a lot of the working population in London live in outer London, but it's starting to get there. And but I think we have to face facts that even in central London, footfall levels are going to always be lower than they were pre-2019. But actually, as people want this experiential trip, people will head towards bigger cities. And of course, if you haven't been to London for a long time, you'll want to go. And if you've got Saturday free, you'll make the trip into London on a Saturday. And if you're in the office one day a week, you may well combine that with eating out and meeting friends or going shopping in the evening. So I think for London, it's going to be about evening shopping, and making sure, obviously, then stores have the right colleagues in to maximise the value of those transactions.
Yeah, I've been in London recently, probably more weekends than weekdays, but certainly feels busy. Certainly lots of experiential stores. So clearly you've got the Microsoft one on the corner of Oxford Circus, but On Running have got one now. So again, retailers being smart in that's the only place you can go and experience that. So they're pulling people back into the centre.
Yes, absolutely. And London always been the place where, if there's a new retail concept, it will be tried in London first, simply because the sheer volume and weight of footfall and the diversity of the shopping population. So I don't think that will change. And actually, there are more opportunities opening up, certainly in terms of pop-ups and temporary shops for new retailers. And, a lot of the retailers that innovative, smaller retailers that have grown online are starting to look at pop-up stores, and they're looking at those in London in the first instance. So I think we're going to start to get a whole new generation of retailers cropping up over the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Excellent. Good. Well, we'll pause there for this one. As I say, we're going to do these more regularly this year, so every kind of 4 to 6 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how things change during each episode. But I think we close this one on a positive note. Things are looking relatively healthy. It's not as maybe doom and gloom as was once forecast.
No, it's I'm feeling relatively positive about it. I mean, there are challenges, of course there are, but hopefully this will encourage retailers and act as a sort of incentive for retailers to review operations and review their strategy to align themselves with the new consumer.
Brilliant. Thanks, Di. Always great to talk, and we'll catch up on the next episode.
Thanks, Simon.